Donna, I started this show, I think 3 years ago at 4 o'clock saying the bottom is calling and it wants to know if we're there yet. I've stopped doing that. I learned my lesson. But we're covering this as an example of the things Trump is trying to inject into the general election because we're 100 days out. But we should also cover this as the cruelty. And it is the same vein of cruelty that he physically mocked a disabled person, the same vein of cruelty that allowed him to cage small children and separate them from their families. There's a cruelty and the feeling of sort of sticking your finger in an electric socket if you know anyone or love anyone that has been screened for dementia or Alzheimer's.
Well, I mean, I think that you're right, Nicole. I mean, you and I know that there is no bottom to this presidency, and every week demonstrates that. And I think this, in particular, where the president of the United States, the leader of the free world, is calling into question his own cognition and confuses cognition with intelligence, and at the same time doesn't appreciate, in the same way that he doesn't appreciate the numbers of people and have empathy for the numbers of people who are suffering from coronavirus and who've died, nor does he appreciate the circumstance, the sad circumstance of millions of Americans who suffer from dementia and Alzheimer's in their years. And I think that the president demonstrates once again that he has no ability really to put himself into someone else's shoes. And I have to say that I think Joe Biden must love the fact that the president injects his own cognitive or lack of cognitive ability in this election instead of talking about what should motivate him in terms of leading the American people.
And Nick, if you drill down in presidential polls after Election Day, the outcome usually turns on the axis of two questions: who best understands the problems that you're facing and who looks like a stronger leader. Donald Trump has no ground to spare on either. Biden's way ahead on empathy, but John Heilemann has pointed out that this question of relatability, if it gets too far out of reach, if that gap gets too large, it is an unwinnable contest for Donald Trump. Here's Joe Biden doing his best to exploit the empathy gap. Let's watch.
I don't understand his inability to get a sense of what people are going through. He just can't relate in any way. Those folks who've lost somebody feel like they've been dragged into a dark, deep hole in the middle of their chest. They don't know what to do. They're scared to death. And what's the president do? He talks about taking away health insurance. His own staff admits that Donald Trump fails the most important test of being an American president: the duty to care for you, for all of us.
There is no example of a president at sort of a high watermark that didn't succeed in holding this country as it grieves, as it struggles, as it suffers. Donald Trump either can't do it or won't do it. But meanwhile, Joe Biden is just surging ahead of him in poll after poll after poll.
Well, Nicole, look, being president or a successful candidate for president, involves a holistic kind of leadership, charisma, empathy, action, right? Policy, all these things come together. And the president right now, he's really in this weird trap of his own devising, right? He and his campaign have put out these videos deceptively cut and on Twitter to say that Biden is senile, and voters aren't buying it. But the president is now buying it, and he thinks he can win this campaign on a mano-a-mano fight over who has a higher test score. And it just feels very divorced from the moment when people are really worried and scared, if not for their lives, for their parents' lives, for their loved ones, for their jobs, for their kids going to school. And you don't get the sense, even when you see the president trying to adapt by returning to the press conferences, that he understands that this is a moment of crisis, and it's going to be a crisis kind of long past Election Day. And we as voters are used to seeing a certain set of tics from a president, a certain set of acts, even rote, even feigned from a president to get through these times. He doesn't display those things.
Phil Rucker, I know I've asked you this before. I'm going to ask again. Is there anything happening behind the scenes, phone calls to relatives? I mean, every newspaper, I get 3 at my house and I flip through the back and I read all the obituaries. And there's some exquisitely written obituaries in your newspaper, in Nick's, in my local newspaper where I am. Any evidence that he reads those and is moved by them and asks for anybody's phone numbers?
No, nothing that I can report. That's not to say he's not making that kind of contact. Perhaps he is, but he's probably not, because I think if he were making those sorts of empathetic outreach calls to people hurt by this virus, his spokespeople would be the first to alert the news media about it. And we've not heard about him doing that. In fact, when he makes public appearances, we rarely even hear him voice thoughts and empathy for people who are suffering. We've seen it a little bit in these briefings he's been doing the last few days, but there were any number of public appearances earlier this summer where the president would come out and say next to nothing about the coronavirus and, in fact, pretend like it wasn't happening.
Donna, to Phil Rucker's point, the New York Times reports that in that interview we just showed, I believe it was in that interview, this is how they describe his sort of snap back to his reflexes that Phil Rucker's talking about when it comes to the pandemic. Mr. Trump appeared to shift away from more sober assessments he's delivered about the pandemic, which has killed more than 143,000 Americans, by saying that coronavirus testing was, quote, overrated and, quote, makes us look bad. He then accused Democrats of sounding the alarm over a virus for political reasons. Watch, Mr. Trump said, on November 4th, everything will open up. I mean, this is a bitter, delusional, angry guy who I suppose he's saying on November 4th, everything will open up because he knows he's going to lose.
Well, whatever it is that the president is selling, the American people are really not buying, Nicole. When you have 4 million people who contracted a virus, 143,000 who died, and thousands more projected to die from his failures and incompetence, there's no getting around that. And so even if the president wants to try to sugarcoat it, and I think that's what he's doing if he's not avoiding it altogether, it simply won't work, because there are too many of us who have personally been touched by a family member who's died, a funeral that you can't attend, the stories that you tell on this program every day, and the American people simply are not buying it. And it's the sign, frankly, of a very failed president.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.